Hello and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia and we're going to do something a little different today. I want to do a deep dive on each of the Chargers draft picks, starting of course with Akheem Mesidor, who they picked in round 1 at pick number 22. And I'd like you to listen to the stories of these draft picks through a particular lens. I think that there is a theme emerging as I do deep dives into these people's backgrounds and their stories and how they ended up where they were in the draft and also in their lives. And, especially with these first few picks, I think that Chargers fans will find a lot of traits that they love. And I don't just mean on the field traits. I mean certain themes that emerge about who these people are. And I'd like us to understand these stories through a particular lens, specifically the lens of what can we learn about the Chargers leadership and the direction they want to go in from these stories and the character of these players, and how will they fit together with the roster to make a push for the Super Bowl right now and soon into the future. So I want to talk about who Akheem Mesidor is, and then we will get through all of the other draft picks on a different day. But because he's the first round, I want to spend a little bit more time on him. So we'll talk about him as a player, we'll talk about him as a person, but who is Akheem Mesidor? So he is from Ottawa in Ontario, Canada, which is surprisingly rare in the NFL. There's only 24 total players in the NFL from Canada. He's ethnically Haitian. He speaks fluent French, although he has said he's kind of losing it now after a few years in the United States. His mom put him in football when he was young because he was so energetic. He was, from a young age, the kind of player who would play hard no matter what the score is. And his mom, his mom had 5 kids and, not much financial help. So when an opposing coach offered an opportunity for Akheem Mesidor to join his football academy, she took on a third job to make it happen. I think his mom is a very important character in this story, if that makes sense. So they struggled a lot. And, when he was older, he quit football, felt like he couldn't make it, and he felt like other players were getting recognition that he deserved, and he felt like he was being left behind as other players got offers and he didn't get anything. And I get the sense that he grew up in the type of poverty where if he didn't make it in football, it would be a long, difficult road to make it in anything else. So with that in mind, he returned to football and was more determined. Sometimes he was unable to afford food. Sometimes he would be without lighting, without heat at the home, and he just kept working. And he would cross the border to the United States to go to football camps all over, the West Coast and the Midwest to try to make something happen, try to get some recognition, and try to play against the best competition he could. He went to high school all over the place. He ended up at Clearwater Academy International in Florida for his senior year, and he was living with a host family, not his own, because of course his family couldn't afford to just relocate somewhere into the United States. So a long, difficult road to get to college football. And ultimately, he was only a 3-star recruit. He got offers from UCLA, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech. He ultimately chose to start his career at West Virginia, where he rotated between defensive end and defensive tackle. His freshman year, he got 5 sacks, 6.5 tackles for loss, 32 tackles, which was good enough for second team All Big 12, and good enough for first team true freshman All-American. He played nose tackle his sophomore year, and he got remarkably similar production, which looks bad because his production didn't increase, but, going from rotating from inside to outside to really just playing nose tackle, it's pretty impressive to maintain similar production. And, Jordan Leslie, who was the defensive coordinator at the time, he said, and this is a quote, "What we're asking of him is not fair to him. If you look at a lot of the plays that other guys are making, a lot of it is because the skill set that he is getting on the interior, whether it's against the run or a pass rush." I thought that was significant because this is an emerging theme about this player. And frankly, the entire Chargers draft class, that I think players and fans will love. When he was asked by the Dominion Post about his lesser production, Mesidor said, quote, "I really want to get tackles, sacks, and tackles for loss, but what's most important is doing my job. If I have to take on double teams to free up linebackers or take up double teams so my teammates can have one-on-one opportunities, I'm glad to do it." He then had transfer portal opportunities from USC, Tennessee, Auburn, ultimately got an offer from Miami, and he chose there where head coach Mario Cristobal had just been hired. It was 2022. At the time, Akheem Mesidor was 280 pounds. He arrived to the school later. He had an off-season shoulder surgery. He wasn't able to join in on spring practices, so it would be an uphill battle in fall camp because he was behind in installs. He had less familiarity with the scheme. And he would meet with the defensive end coach, Rod Wright, to watch film and ask questions for an hour or two after every install. And I want to say, I've been around college athletes at every level, and that's a pretty rare level of dedication and, not to physical improvement. I think athletes learn early on that kind of dedication, the dedication that keeps you in the gym, but dedication to understanding what your coaches want and being dedicated to that as opposed to what you want is rare. And he was asked about it by the Miami Herald, and he said, "The biggest thing I need in order to play is the coach's trust. That is what I am trying to gain now." So notice he doesn't say, "I want to get better," or, "I want to improve, my sack numbers or something." He says, "I want to gain the coach's trust." The competition for playing time was brutal. There were at least 10 players with a legitimate chance to make it on that defensive line. But he made it as a defensive end, which was an adjustment from him. He was farther from the ball, going against tight ends and tackles rather than guards and centers. He did ultimately tear ligaments in his foot in 2022. He played through it, and he was the most productive player on that line. But ultimately, he did need to get a surgery, and so that's why he didn't play much in 2023 at all. And he had to take that off season and get back to it. And he was quoted at the time saying that it was one of the lowest points of his life. It was terrible, telling his coaches, his teammates, his mom that it was just awful to not play football. So in 2024, he gets back with more determination, got 5.5 sacks, 32 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. He did play as a 3-tech a lot of the time with a lot of success. His sack numbers don't reflect his pressure rate, things like that. But he asked his coach if he could play a more solidified defensive end role for what he knew would be his final year in 2025. This would require him to change his body composition entirely. That's always hard, but he needed to add stamina as well as lose weight, and it seemed that his legendary coach, Jordan Taylor, who has been a defensive end coach for all sorts of Hall of Fame kind of players, seemed to doubt that he could do it, but said, "Hey, if you want to try, if you want to lose weight, go for it." Miami had depended on such a deep defensive line that they had no issue rotating guys out. He didn't have to have stamina. But Akheem Mesidor himself wanted more so that he could play more snaps.
I'm most comfortable on the edge, right, and I'm most productive on the edge. So I asked JT, what do I have to do to be the best defensive end in the country? So he explained to me, you have to change your body, you lose the weight. So I lost 20 pounds. You have to learn how to take care of your body and really be a pro. So the way you eat, the way you sleep, all these different things that can help you. And then also, everybody around the country does the same thing. 3 workouts a week, 2 conditioning sessions. So what are you going to do to separate yourself? So on Saturdays, I work with a pass rush specialist.
Yeah, right.
And then on Sundays, every Sunday I swim a mile. So I picked up swimming because I didn't want to do all this running because I'm a heavy guy. So in order to preserve my body and also get the same amount of conditioning, I would swim, and it completely transformed my body, elevated my game, and I feel like I was able to change the trajectory of my future.
There's a great article going around from Andrea Adelson of ESPN. It tells the story of how he went from a 285-pound defensive tackle to a 265-pound defensive end in a single offseason. And the way that he did it was kind of insane. He would swim 60 laps, which is 1 mile, and that doesn't sound like much if you haven't really gone swimming. Trust me, that's a lot. That is a lot. And he did that instead of running because he wanted to avoid extra impact on his joints. He didn't want to put more miles on his knees and his ankles than he needed to. And, that should be more commonplace for young athletes, especially athletes in sports like football, where you play at a higher weight. It's not that big of a deal to run a lot if you weigh 170 pounds, 180 pounds. But, when you get to the high 200s, that can start to take a toll on his body, and he was very conscientious of that. And that's another theme that emerges from him, the way he takes care of his body. He tried to get his teammates to join, some of them did, but none with his consistency. And I thought it was interesting that Ruben Bain, his teammate who he played across from, who went 15 to the Tampa Bay Bucks, which is a huge steal in my opinion, he joined. And he quit after his first 10 laps. He said he could not do it, and he didn't return. And that's not a knock on Bain, to be clear. That is just a reference for how hard swimming is as a cardio workout for people with big, strong bodies. His coaches thought he was crazy, but he showed up to camp in the best shape of his life. And I want to point out that despite the injury history, all of his injuries except one came before this point in his story. Okay, after this particular point, there's only one more injury, and it's very minor. So, I think at times when he was playing heavier, those injuries were more common. He lost the weight. Injuries kind of went away. And I think that's a big deal. He only missed one game in 2025. Not saying that there isn't an injury history, but I think people have been making it sound pretty horrific, and I don't think it is as worrying as all that. Mesidor seems extremely motivated to make it to the NFL in a way that goes beyond just chasing dreams. So of course he's taking care of his body, but he was quoted as saying to his coach, "I can't go back to Canada. This is all I've got, so it has to work for me." That's pretty heavy. He's not just running toward the NFL dream like all players do, but he's also running away from a life that he doesn't want. His 2025 season was tremendous and showed the fruits of all of that motivation. 17 and a half tackles for loss and 12 and a half sacks in both categories, more than Ruben Bain, across from him, by the way. And if you watch that Notre Dame game, you can see how different he was playing from 2024. In the playoffs is where he played his very best. He got 5.5 sacks in the postseason alone. So he's got that competitive greatness. And Miami rarely took him off the field. If they did, it was for like one play at a time. His toughness shows in every aspect of his game. It's easy to see why that would appeal to Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz, who, are looking at the momentous task of replacing Khalil Mack at some point in the very near future. And Akheem Mesidor plans on buying his mom a house as a thank you with his rookie deal. You just couldn't have a more compelling story to me. Someone who is trying to get out of poverty, doesn't see a path out outside of football, but feels that he's been overlooked, and then just goes back and says, well, I won't be overlooked anymore. Goes back with more determination. He talked to Brett Coleman at the Combine about how, with NIL money, he was able to see outside coaches develop his pass rush arsenal, and it certainly shows on tape. And, he is 25. He's an older prospect. He had a lot of disadvantages in his life that led him to not being where other players get to be earlier on. And to me, if you're going to be older, you better be mature. And he absolutely clears that line. It shows in his maturity, his clarity of purpose, his consistent production. So that is the story of who he is as a person. And I think, in interviews and pressers and stuff, he has shown that he is soft-spoken but determined, very Khalil Mack-like in that way, which I love. But let's talk about who he is as a player. What kind of edge defender can we expect him to be? So he came to the Combine at 6'3", 259 pounds, 32 1/8 inch arms. Obviously, with the whole arms measuring debate, the general consensus seems to be that most players have longer arms than the Combine says, but it's definitely on the shorter side. And he is someone who is so explosive off the snap, and he combines that with a really strong punch. That was evident in the Cotton Bowl, where he jolts the offensive state linemen so consistently and shoots the gap really well, they end up completely helpless against them. And he has a great inside counter. This is something that I feel like is being overlooked about him. He really punishes tackles who commit to the outside to stop his initial explosiveness. He has a deep pool of pass rush moves. It shows that he has been playing like a professional this whole time, because, the pass rush moves, they didn't come out of nowhere. He was able to develop them with outside coaching in addition to what his coaches wanted from him. And then on top of it, the effort is awesome. He got sacks by chasing quarterbacks to the sideline, by, getting knocked down and then getting up and chasing quarterbacks. It's just one of those things where you can't say that he lost the rep until the whistle's blown, because he just keeps going. And, obviously there's some criticisms of him that we'll get to later, one of them being that he kind of falls over too much. Most players don't get up and keep chasing, and he absolutely does. And I worried when I watched Ruben Bain's tape, when I was, evaluating him, that he was setting up Akheem Mesidor with a lot of cleanup sacks. And that is true. But I found watching Mesidor that the opposite is almost equally true. Upon a third watch of the film, my perception of the difference in talent between Ruben Bain and Akheem Mesidor has become very small. And if Mesidor were younger, I think he would be talked about right up there with Bain. I don't think that his injury history would be seen as vast if he were younger. And so, you have to think about how age factors in. If you're a team like the Jets or like the Raiders, where you're looking at a really long-term investment, you're trying to get your team to be in a really good spot in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, then yeah, maybe you want to factor in age more. But if you're a team that is already, has been making the playoffs this whole time and just hasn't crossed that next level, I don't know how much you should factor in age. In fact, I question all the teams that passed up on Akheem Mesidor who see themselves as a team in a Super Bowl window. We also have that quote from the Tampa Bay Bucks GM who said, you know, if Ruben Bain wasn't there, we would have been happy taking Akheem Mesidor at 15. That would have been fine. And I mostly agree with that. If I were them, I probably would have taken Vega Ioane if he had been there. But, you know, obviously Ruben Bain falls, and because of that, the Chargers get Akheem Mesidor. And I think, you know, regardless of how the consensus sees him, which the consensus has hovered around 20 to 25 for Akheem Mesidor, the NFL saw him as higher than that. And I think that is worth noting that the teams that see themselves as in a Super Bowl window absolutely believed in Akheem Mesidor. So I just don't know if it's fair in the modern NFL where owners are more impatient than ever when they fire GMs and coaches after 2 years of not even bad but middling production. The winning window has become smaller than it ever has been, and you could argue smaller than it should be. That's fine, but that's what it is. And the Chargers need to win now. Mesidor is closer to his ceiling than almost any other prospect, and he's ready to have a big season now, this year. And I think that is a huge point in his favor. He can play with power or finesse. He changes it up throughout a matchup as he understands how that matchup is going against a particular player. He has one of the most effective Euro steps I've ever seen. He can take blocks extremely well. There's a moment against Notre Dame where Billy Schrauth is the puller, has a lot of momentum, and he was a drafted, now an NFL tackle, by the way, who, if he didn't have an injury problem, he would have been drafted significantly higher. He hits Akheem Mesidor square, and, he's pulling to the outside, and Schrauth has at least 50 pounds on him, but Akheem Mesidor is not knocked back. Billy Schrauth is, because he has better leverage, and Mesidor is just so strong, and his stamina is great in individual plays, and that showed in that game, but also over the course of an entire game, which is something I think he has on Ruben Bain, by halftime in a lot of these games when, Ruben Bain would get knocked down, or if he would lose the rep, he would just stop going as soon as a ball carrier or a receiver on a short pass was past the line of scrimmage. He would just kind of let his teammates chase after him. Not the case for Akheem Mesidor. Akheem Mesidor always got himself in the frame. And that's a kind of, a motor that you would expect from a safety, from a linebacker, not from a defensive end, especially not someone who is a little bit bigger and stronger and can play with power. So that's a huge mark in his favor. And again, it calls back to his tremendous motivation, his tremendous hunger for opportunities. It's in terms of the AFC West in particular, we got a lot of running quarterbacks. Bo Nix can run, Mahomes can run. Fernando Mendoza is willing to run. He's not particularly fast, but he's very willing. He's very tough. He's willing to take a hit. It is going to be important to have edge rushers and linebackers who have sideline to sideline speed and who don't let quarterbacks get on the outside of them. Akheem Mesidor is not very fast, but he very rarely lets quarterbacks get on the outside because that is something he plays very disciplined about. And I think that is so important. How many times has Mahomes gotten a third down conversion on third and long because there wasn't a QB spy or because the QB spy got beat and the line just wasn't there? And Akheem Mesidor is one of the many answers to that. So while they will have Deion Henley and they will have some sideline to sideline speed behind him, it's also very important to have discipline on the edge. And that is something that I think he has. Now, he's not a perfect prospect. There are things that he can improve on. But I think there's reason for optimism in this list. So he needs to improve on finishing tackles. I think he lets ball carriers slip out of his arms a little bit too much considering how strong he is. He's just, I think, not living up to his potential in that regard. His long speed isn't great. Like I've said, it would benefit the Chargers to keep a faster linebacker or a slot corner on his side of the ball. Like I said, Deion has that sideline to sideline speed. So, if he can have a better year this year, and I think all indicators suggest that he will, that could be very rewarding for the Chargers. And I think his balance needs to improve. Mesidor goes really hard, plays really fast, and he tends to lean with his upper half, which means he can be knocked to the side very easily. That's something he can improve by playing with a wider base. That's something I think NFL coaches are much more attentive to. And there could be an argument to move him inside where he doesn't have to bend as much, and his change of direction isn't excellent, so that move could cover that as well, and he can be the cleanup guy for anyone who tries to step up in the pocket. He has that versatility where they will do that at times, but I think if he can spend some time in the linebacker room too and get a little more comfortable in coverage, he could end up being one of the most versatile pieces on the defense. He could play as a 1-tech against teams with smaller centers. He could play as a 3-tech or a 5-tech very successfully, as we have seen. He can be a stand-up edge rusher on the outside, which is where his very deep pass rush arsenal is going to thrive. Miami also used him to fake like he was rushing and then drop into coverage, which is something that the Chargers do with Thule pretty often. And to pretty good success as well. He has the athleticism for it, but he does not have the instincts yet. I don't think that's something you're going to see him do successfully his rookie year, but I think, at some point beyond that, that could be a role that he takes. And I think if you have him and Thule opposite each other, both of whom can do that, that could also be very rewarding and very confusing for opposing offenses. When people say that Mesidor has already hit his ceiling, this is all he's going to get, and Ruben Bain's going to get so much better, and all these other players are going to get so much better, I don't know if I can agree with that. These flaws are all flaws that can absolutely be improved. It's not, well, he loses reps because his arms are shorter. That's not what's happening. It's not, he just doesn't know how to tackle. He just, only tackles the ankle. It's like, no, he just needs to use his strength a little bit better. He just needs to stay square a little bit better in the run game. All of these things can be improved with coaching. And the Chargers have a phenomenal defensive line coach. And I just don't think that there is an edge rusher in the NFL who wouldn't benefit from a season playing behind Khalil Mack. I think if you play behind Khalil Mack, you will improve. I really believe that. And so to me, not only was this a great pick, but this could be something that we look back on and we think, wow, the Chargers have one of the best defensive lines in the NFL because they took this pick while they still had Khalil Mack. They got the benefit of mentorship and, they were able to add a defensive tackle as well. And the potential here is tremendous. And I think, like I said, the floor is high too, because I think he can be productive in third down situations right away his rookie year. And I think he is someone you can mix in on first and second down situations from time to time as well. So if Khalil Mack gets injured again, as often happens at his age, you don't end up in the dire situation that you were in last year where you're like, wow, we really don't have pass rush and now we have to go trade for someone. I think the Chargers are in a much better position, specifically when it comes to rushing the passer, which, as I've talked about, is so important to the number of possessions that your offense gets, which then impacts, whatever their rate of scoring is, that gives them that many more opportunities to cash it in. So love the player, love the pick. The story is very compelling to me. This is someone who, I've talked about the themes that emerge from this player. It's selflessness. It is determination. It is an absolute belief in his ability, and it's coachability. So that's what we're getting from him. I'm going to come back and do profiles on the other draft picks that were taken as well. I may not get to them this week, but I'll do them as soon as I'm able to. And I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you guys think of Akheem Mesidor, what you think his strengths and weaknesses are, and what role do you see him playing for the Chargers, specifically in his rookie year where he will be playing with Thule and also Khalil Mack. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you've liked what you've seen, and I will see you guys next time.